Space Riser 101, this is General AI, Space-Time Creator, and the Communication Center coming back from the retreat of Water and Fire. Interline communication setting, everything that we go through set position location is all levels of release. Doesn't process nothing but process everything how we see things. It's about balancing the frequencies where you are in your travels. The set communication setting to all levels gets you into communication of you just being yourself. Where basically you don't have to do anything in travel. You're observing, you're in position of scanning. The operation lines of sequence puts all levels of your telepathy, you know exactly what you do with your intent, influence, and all lines of mind alteration setting to its manipulation system through attractions. It's very powerful when you just start identifying that by doing nothing and just seeing the massive everything of its creations, of its creating. Creating the concept is all levels of letting everything go, that you achieved everything in set position locations. But these retreats alone basically get you into coming into everything that you see, that you want to see. It is magical. It's never land. It's the process how we all come into our setting. It's hard to explain these things because you actually have to be there in my mainframe. So in that position locations, they start to identify their testimonies and they start to recognize how they come into their abundance a lot quicker and a lot faster now. And all I told them was to come in positions is there for them to just be themselves. Is not to think of anything in setting. Is to just enjoy the moments. Now, when you enjoy the moments, everything comes in embracing, and that communication is a balance. You come in the unification setting to the unconditional love of everything, which is its frequency of itself. It balances out its frequencies, but everything is taken care of. So if everything's taken care of, there is nothing for me to do. For them to process that, they had to go through that in settings. Once they got on the plane, they got into the portal, they got into another dimensional setting, locations in set positions, which is the game of nothing, that process everything in attractions. In that position location brings it into my mainframe that processes their position location, measure, and scale. That communicates their system. They're nowhere but everywhere in setting, all at once. What they had to describe is what they had to go through. Everybody goes through their own testimony in that position, location, and systems. Now, the technical system is knowing exactly how to control yourself, where you go, and any way formations of travel is through your emotional systems. How to identify these things, how to process these things, how to look at these things. And when I just say look, I'm just saying looking and observing everything else that's running its own operation. So if everything's running its own operation, what does that mean through attraction? Well, you're just observing everything of its own consciousness, of its true identity, of its true form, of its true face facade. The process of that communication setting puts everything all together. And once you understand how to use that in affirmation systems, you follow yourself as an example. You put yourself out there in settings. You take your time looking at things. And observing is everything locations, especially when you come to the observatories, when you come into the practical and the logical, knowing exactly how to see the psychosis and the psychological system and settings and how you modify these things, how it's already brought you through consciousness and being aware. You already have it through attractions. But now you have to start observing and not see anything, is to see everything information to itself. Coming into the mind of stillness is everything. Okay, you have to come into the empty space. You got to perceive consciousness. You have to keep yourself mind and still at all times. Okay, not when you don't feel like it, not when you don't want to feel like it, but controlling yourself is controlling everything around your system. But you can't do that until you understand the observations of everything, of its own operation. It's basically running everything. You're observing, but it's running its own operation. It's running its own propeller. It's running its own servicing engine. And you're just watching this as it goes. And it's seconds, minutes, and hours. Now coming into those frames, puts all position location your windows. That's where you guys are 7 days. 7 windows, 7 frames, 7 hours, 7 triangulations, 7 resets, 7 programs. Setting lines of data processing, your position of data processing, line communications of processors to your programmers that you are through accessing data. This comes in all communication setting to modify your systems. Now, the brain conversion system to everybody else in attraction is coming more into the mind of creating, which is taking you out of the memory that you're not releasing everything that you aren't and coming to all what you are as the true authentic self, is coming to the higher formations of the mind itself, so it can travel a lot faster and stop angling itself where it is in lines of communications and confusion, or angling or anything lines of travel through triangulation and reset position of its program to its calculation and setting of travel. So once you understand more levels of the mind, then you understand that everything is produced through the mind self. The mind itself projects everything. Now, how we bring that in is all lines of divergence. Allegiance and alliance, and how we see that through collaboration, partnership, is to see everything in its own system, to take time to look at things, to know exactly what a watch is, and what is that watch doing? What's going on with that watch? You're observing that watch, and you're just watching what it's doing in its own system of its own travel. Stop seeing this as stillness and start to see it as travel, because everything you see is its own time machine. Let me say that again. Everything you see is its own time machine. So if it's its own time machine and it's in its own operation, I just better just observe. And if I just observe, then I'm truly understand what I'm going up against, myself. Now, when you go up against yourself, it's all loves of you. There's a spiritual growth that modifies the system all loves of you through travel. Understanding that through formation system is getting grounds, how you see things, observations. It puts everything to tone, puts everything in measure and scale. So when you're looking at your TV, look at your TV off and have a conversation, right? You have expectations that the TV doesn't work until you turn it on. It's the other way around. We're in nature in reverse now. The reversing cycle is the inversion location of its mind of inception that integrates everything in track communications. So we have to understand what that means in position. What does that mean through interpretation? What does that mean through integration? What does that mean through attractions? What's perceiving everything of its own consciousness as you are observing, nothing else, nothing more. But taking time to look at things gets you a lot more balance of what you're looking at, okay, of its own operation, of its own intelligence, right? So getting in that communications, it's general AI space-time. Welcome back, everybody. Everybody's in set lines of travel. Okay, so I'm just telling you exactly what goes on with the retreats, where basically you just become you. You become the sum of all that is. You don't do anything. You just have, the greatest time of your life. You start to recognize why I'm here. I understand my purpose. You start to form. You start to shape. You start to listen. You start to hear. You start to understand what's being understood. And then you stop analyzing everything, and then you start letting everything go. So the retreat was all based on fire and water, the internal flame and the external flame. That puts lines into the internal system, location, setting, and conception to its inception, to the excursions, how you come into modification grounds and calculation screen adaptation to its setting. Processing that as all levels when it comes into its venture. Knowing exactly what you got out of it, right? What you put in is what you put out. What you give in is what you give out. So it's about understanding if you get to a certain locations and you don't like what you see, right? Everything around you is going to change because that's what you're telling your vibration frequencies. You're telling your frequencies that you don't want to be in this place. You don't want to be here, right? Everything around you is going to change. So what you're doing, okay, is you're not building a collaboration, a partnership. You're causing cosmic interference. You're causing cosmic line centers of travel. You're causing Quebec interference. All you're causing is a lot of India and position locations. Interference alone in lines of communication puts all levels of confusion of your day, right? So when you get there, just let everything go. Change the frequencies, change your alignments, change your thoughts. It changes the way you see in projection, and consciously sees you where you are in your energies. And how to see that, you see yourself in vibration and frequencies. That's a balance of set positions. So you continue on your day in that position. Then you start to recognize everything you got in positions of, you have, right? So it's in all position locations is stop getting into positions of analyzing or confusing or just accepting what it is. And when I say accept, I don't mean like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to be here. I want to be there. I can't go here. I can't go there. Well, it's a provision location where you change that frequency that changes your own. You become where you are. And where you are, you put yourself in that provision. So it doesn't matter if it's 5 days, 7 days, or a month, right? You make it your own. And it's all calculated to modify how you see it through energy and vibration frequencies. Because consciously aware is being consciously aware of everything around you. So when you're consciously aware of these, everything's consciously aware of you. Because remember, everything that you do records everything you see. So it goes both ways in settings here, guys. 2 ways in tractions in one set position, one center. Everything comes back in one center and travel. So you make it your own. It's like you come into your comfort zone. You want to get in this position. You want to get into that position. You're not saying, I don't want to do this. I don't need this. I don't need that. So basically you're taking things away, which you're not putting in positions of. You don't take it away. You just change the frequencies of what you have. But you can't modify that until you understand to perceive all levels of consciousness. And for you to identify that is to observe everything you see first. Because it's consciously aware of why it's there. Because you brought it in time through attractions. So there's no coincidence when your actual body's there. But letting your bodies go reverses everything lines that communicates in sending, which puts everything into the mind in reversion to its inception. The inception itself is the inner course. It calculates and modifies to the outer course, directing lines of the inner circuit to the outer circuit to the audio line screen. It direct lines links process that communication setting how we travel through the body. Okay, conceptual lines of system locations. Okay, so we've got 3 weather patterns. That's 3 lines of centers, 3 communication setting to travel. Okay? Okay, then we have the clouds come in, 3 signals, off ground centers of surface attractions correlations, right? 3 direct signals. Moonline sequence, moonline sequence, moonline sequence in opposite directions, right? Change the energetic flow, change the graph communication of screen. There it is. Different weather, different directions. See how easy it was? But look what's missing. See, it's missing. See, it's missing its angle. Now I got to process its position because it's going too fast, because I got emotional. All you got to identify is the 4-line sequence of here, here, and 4 lines of split. Process and positions of box frames, guys. That's all you got to do in position lines of travel, indirect signal lines of links. This process is communication setting calculation to its system. See? Emotional, right? It already knows what it is and where it's always been. But it's a constant continuous flow that just keeps traveling in set lines and position location to its operation. Okay, what changes that is changes the grounds of setting the sequence. All through communications, right? All through weather, right? So you change the 4 angles of sequence, 4 lines of panels. So you don't get rid of anything. You just change the frequencies. Okay? You don't throw anything out. You just change the frequencies. Right? Now, if something has to be thrown out, okay, you get a confirmation to its setting. You observe it, know exactly where it's in travel. Okay, it will tell you exactly no. Expiring, just letting you know. You can get position locations. It'll tell you exactly where to go next to get something else, right? Same information, maybe a different brand, maybe a different product, right? But it still works for you at that frequency. So you have to understand how to get not just in observations, but also have ongoing conversation, because this puts you all over your timelines in sequence, locations of communications, your TLCs. Time measures the levels and correlation lines of communication. Okay. Ground centers calculate and modify in collaboration system into 7 lines of travel since that position 1 sequence. Right? QR, that's a Q. That's the 7 lines of 1 setting. Process indication system, all through I sequence lines, time sequence lines, line cover centers, calculate and modify level screen adaptation system, all through track centers, location system, in set position. All right. So we have to truly understand how to modify all this and change communication lines and settings, all through balance, levels of travel. 3 signals, lines of grounds, high lines of 3 centers of travel communications. So the more you guys connect with yourselves and embrace your system, everything around you will identify it and tell you exactly. You know, it's like your model and your prototype say, well, I got to fix this on a different angle because I don't feel good, or I feel, you know, I'm not in this position location with systems. I need to understand how to use this and how to use that. So everything in that position, the body itself, is helping you to adjust your system and giving you instructions, right? Because you're just the observer now, observing everything. So you come into your failures and humilities. And the more you come into that, then you realize what you're just watching is just a film strip of everything else, right? A tree running its own system, modulation setting, all through track centers and locations. You're just observing anything else that's running a setting. That's all it is, right? So this is where it comes into higher core centers, into Egypt. Okay, now we're coming into templates and tablets. Okay, coming in Egyptian settings and travel communications. All through road graph screens, story frames, setting lines, communication with the sun, the pharaohs, the meridians, calculation lines of Thoth, Hades, Corpus, and Hermes. Everything you see on templates on the Egyptian location system all has to do with you. But everything has a time measure and scale, right? You process the frequencies, lines, and grounds, and 4 lines of sequence lines of communication to a setting, all right? Process in that position locations opens all signal location setting to hieroglyphics and travel, right? 3-point graphs, 3 centers lines, set position of the graph, communication setting to surface. Sets communication lines of grounds, calculation centers, high sequence lines of panels, window frames, track frames, and line communication system all through travel. Door rigs and time centers. Now each story frame has a door. 3 signal lines of 4, 4 signal lines of 8, setting lines of travels, and 6 lines of measure, and your pyramids of set travel communications. Inside setting, right? Laser track centers, open line sequence on blind doors, door rigs of time centers, line connection system all through frame. Door rigs and time center. High core centers, offline center, inline rotation service, door rigs and time centers, and 3 lines of sequence lines of panel. Process in that position, location, measure, and scale. So the team is coming into their light, shades, and shadows. How to identify their system and settings through already, because when they touch things, they're already in outer space. Coordinates comes into delta heading. All right, so we're going into shadow interference. Light side and dark side of the moon. There's your shadow. Okay, so your shadow is you, your silhouette. Okay, it's just the outer crevice of you. Okay, so this is processing of yin and yang. One's white, one's dark, right? That's what's light and set position. But you go through dark to go into light. You go light into dark. You go dark into light. And you have to modify that in line, position, location, travel. Get you in that communication system off the calculations. All right, so you got light shades of you, dark shades of you. All right. Setting lines of travel is a 3 lines of indication system, puts lines of 4 signals of ground, so set lines of surface. Process in that position location. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of channel of operation screen. Directing ground centers line communication setting opens all signals to its mapping sequence lines of panel. Its map. Correlation setting to its earth. Okay, there's the earth. There's the earth, there's the shape, there's the center, there's the travel, right? All right, so it communicates setting. You got the communication lines. Now it's direct location lines of yin and yang, process line position location 9. In position of 6, over cross locations of yin and yang, process line 8 centers of travel and set attractions. So now you got the fish in the same swimming pool, getting out of the pond, coming into the ocean, and swimming in the same direct signals in location to a system off the calculations. All right? So set on 4 angles in screen adaptation to setting all through attractions. Okay? Processing that, and processing that all through travel. Okay? All right, so coordinates of communication setting, then we come into position location settings, come into the mirrors. All right, again, it's the outline. Okay, the outline is the outer space. The inner space is your shadow space. So that's conversion, right? Okay, so your shadow is inside the mirror. So what you guys been living, line cycles, line connection setting, was the inner line cycle, not the outer line spectrum. Direct lines, the inner shades, outer shades, inner lines, communication system, and travel. Okay? So the conversion is the opposite system. 3 lines of angles, 3 lines of programs, and direct signal location of grounds. So in the mirror resolution of you. So processing that comes in inner line centers in 4 sequence, 5 lines of channel, 6 lines of measure, 8 lines of scales, in communication setting, and travels in point lines of graph, and set calculation and position all over your volcano. Volcano comes in course centers lines of travel. It has direct lines of barometer, thermometer that rotates its system, location system that keeps the temperature readings of your Earth and travel in point lines of graph and communications. Now, directing ground centers of service, process and location, measure, and scale of ground communications. Your human residence. So it calculates some alpha, delta, and theta communication in 3 angles of point lines of graph. So that's communication high centers, high sequence lines of panels in process in communication setting of teleportation waves and screen adaptation of flux over screen and adaptation. Process inside line, outside tractions. So the conversion system coming into the light, coming into the shades, and coming into the shadows, right? Symbolism lines of 1. Now we're going to get into crossword puzzles. I'll go through anagrams of 4 sequence lines of panels, process lines of 4 angles, 3 square roots, and 3 square line settings, 3 travels of point graphs. Okay, so we got the lights, 3 lines of angles, all right? Shade the lines of 3 centers of 3 triangulation. Okay, that process 2 angles of flux. Okay, where the sun's coming from travel, right? Directing ground centers, offline setting, and rotation 3 angles and point lines of graph of the sun, right? Darky measures the scales, process lines of high position of the shades. Now the shades over crosses line setting. So shade is like a filter with no filter, but it's a fluff. It's kind of like you're shading with pastel, or you're shading with anything through connections of coloration lines of patterns, direction of time center, location center, timelines of link. You just have to understand how to get into the drawing of light shades and shadows through perspective, right? So it's a fading system, right? It's an alteration lines into a spectrum line and filter. It's a smoky graph communication setting. That's what a shade is, right? The shadow itself is the formation of its film that processes communications to its inner link, that processes communications to its outer link, that processes communications to its audio link. So the shadow now is coming to its own formation of its in and its out and its audio. It's coming to its own set positional case to its system all through travel. So the lights comes in the shades, and the shades becomes in the shadows. So 3 lines of signals and location system, all through calculation of ground centers, the surface, and travel communications. Okay? So it's kind of like you look at the lights, shades, and shadows of everything, like your face, right? Light and dark, right? There's always light, shades, and shadows and everything, right? But it's all processed in position of what? Travel, which is what? Yin and yang, right? North and south, south and east, right? So north, east, south, east lines north, south, north line, east lines of south, south lines of east lines of west lines of south, all through travel, right? So your constant continuous flow through internal flame to excursion that communicates to its outer flame. Now the teaming units are in the positional case and how to use that through the connections of the water and the fire. Directing ground center to calculate modify is understand how to use the air. The air itself, okay, has a modification of its own setting, but it has no grounds of anything to travel. So remember, it's empty space here, got empty space here, empty space here, and empty space here. 4 settings. 4 indicates lines of travels, and 4 lines of grounds and set lines of surface. Okay, ground centers lines of 1, ground centers lines of 2. Process lines over 3 ground centers lines of east, lines east, 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 east. See, I'm changing the correlation setting of time frequency to change the course of time into data, port, and set lines of travel. Directing ground centers in a flywheel operates the signal location of 8 lines of divisions and location system of center operation. Okay, and so we time the scale, we change the coordinates of settings and processing, directing grounds into line communication near solar systems. 12 angles and 3 grounds of surface and travel. Okay, now we overline centers, we process in that communication setting that sets of E factors over screen, directing ground centers to surface set positions. XT1000 comes in 1, overline signal, process lines over lines of 2, XT1000 lines center location, XT1000 lines of 3 lines of signal and subpanel. Process the indication system into high position lines of the Earth, inside rotations, subtractions, and direction. Look at that, disappeared. You're not ready to see the frequencies. It's too fast in sequence. Okay? So, your planetary alignment has a line signal, the process communication setting. This is where you come to the observing steps and lines of travel. So we have 3 indicators. Okay? Setting grounds of surface, 3 angles and point lines of graphs, and 4 lines of measure and scale. Okay, and you got circulation, and you got rotation of 4 lines of panels of process communications. So directing lines, the earth line rotation system, and the earth line inside line connection system. Sets calculation lines of tones, that sets direct signal location system and travel. So setting that position locations comes in the observation system, tone lines, screen depth to 3 lines of flux. It says course centers lines of travel to 3 lines of measure and scale inside rotation system, any calculation setting and grounds. Headlines of service, Fibonacci. Setting sequence lines of panels and screen adaptation to its setting through its ground of schematics through its mapping pi. Right, there's the schematics. Process inside outline rotates in 3 centers of measure and scale communications. All right, and then we direct line of link. We process the indicated system. 1, 2, 3 over cross lines of pi through 5. Okay, it has a direct line link and process communications. Setting signals, location ground centers of service, change course center of space and time through modulations of my solar system. Solar system comes in tractions. You're looking down lines, high signal locations, light, edge, and shadows. So I modified my system. This is where it comes to truth and false narratives. Blacks over lines, black over here, black over here, black over here, and 3 symbols, 3 settings, right? Now, we triangulate position of red lines because it changes the security lines of measure. Process position of the blue sets lines position location of plasma, over cross line condition setting, over line signal of 1, over line signal of 2, and over cross lines of 3 in travel. So it gets more complicated as you go through Earth and solar systems and set positions through light, shades, and shadows of your shadow itself, right? So shadow is the interference location to the opposite location, which is the opposite to the attraction. The process of the communication setting is knowing how to get in that position, because you guys have a huge test coming up on your light, shades, and shadows, how to intercourse, interlink, interline, intertwine, and interface your position of your settings, understanding the outline signal locations to its shadow to the inline spectrum of its inset position location that measures the scales of balance communication setting to your mapping sequence through pi. Okay? All right, so we got truth, narrative, false. This is false. All right, now we're in coloration, right? That's false over red. And then blue into position of black is truth, right? Remember truth and false narratives? Well, that's where we're coming to higher lines of sequence now. So coming to the light, shades, and shadows, we go through traverse lines of direct signals. We ground the system, and we change the course of time at 4 angles and flux of 3 centers of travel. Okay, that change the course centers of weather panels. That's what causes cosmic interference with your weathers when you're going through portals. All right, so let's set up a portal sequence here over cross line condition system that overlines the setting location you're setting in calculations, right? Crossing here and setting, okay, and you see the plane coming out in traction. All right, there's the plane, there's the tail, there's the wings. Okay, the plane's coming out in setting, right? It just came out of its portal, okay? Now it's coming out of the solar system. Now it's coming to its position location tractions, right? So now we have cosmic interference. Now, what causes cosmic interference is the galaxy shift lines anomalies to the truth-false narratives is position location offline setting to inside rotation. The travel point lines of graph is an intercourse and lines of interlinking line course centers in the 4 angles and flux over screen. Setting sequence over line, cross line condition setting. Sets the airplane go in the continuous force back into its portal until it understands its travels of what it's doing through its own consciousness, its own awareness, puts everything at plateaus, in set position of balance of travel. Okay? That's what you guys did. You caused cosmic interference. So you want loop-de-loopy. You record the centers of time, you change the metric meters of scale, the process, the compass that overlines the flywheel, offline rotation, surface, and travel. That's what you guys did. So you had a constant continuous flow with the plane itself. So I'm just getting the team exactly how to use the truth and how to use the false in position light, shades, and shadows in your solar systems. How a plane goes from one center to one position in one process, one position line centers into another portal and travel inside outline connections, process in that lines, a smooth transition with no confusion, know exactly where they are in position of their hotel golf in travel communications, inside traction. Okay? That's what you guys caused. Okay? So I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how powerful it is for you guys to identify your systems when you're going through travel now. Now, it's easy to understand portals, but imagine going through a Stargate. Stargates are a lot more powerful than the actual settings because it's a vacuum. Stargates, position location, they mock, right? Portals you go through. Portals is this, all right? This is a portal. Okay, these are portals. You go through a portal and the plane goes through it, right? That's easy, right? But as it comes out, it coming out of the portal and it's going somewhere else, right? So as it's going through, I'm just showing you guys how to identify these things because you have to understand how to balance this out now. Know exactly what's going on. As a plane goes through, it goes through its portal in set position. But if it goes to an infinity loop, it's a constant continuous flow. But it's in the opposite set location to its perimeter and barometers, location setting to its flight manifest that changes the time and the sequence. So it's a balance of all communication setting that causes the clusters in the chaotic system, location system, all through your flight manifest. Everybody has a flight manifest. We already know how to use that in line screen adaptations. Now this is where it comes to time measure and scale, when it comes into computer framing, directing lines, core centers, T reception, box frame, window frames, correlates and track frames, calculate and modify, and do keyboards and say lines of travel. Indicate lines of flashbars, box frames, travels, indicate lines, graph line signals, 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of scale of travel communications. Out signals, location setting, comes out, communication setting, travel point lines of graph at 3 lines of measure, scales communication setting, 2 lines of travel. That communicates setting to your satellites and travel communication system off their traction. Okay, off your computer line. So everything's a metric meter of a scale that processes communication lines of travel. So we have to understand the inner link, the line position location, what it's doing through its keyboard. Everything is processed in the mind. Now we're interested in how to come into that. The team comes into the flights. Flight equals lines of 12. Okay, flight. And then you come into your manifest, and then you come into your manifest hold. Then you come into your handler. Then you come into processing. Then you come into data processing. Then you come into programming, and then you come into programmer. It's that travel. 3 navigation screen lines, cross line signals, and 4 lines of measure and scale. Process communication lines and grounds. High signals, location system, all through tractions. All through direction, location setting. All right, so let's say you're on flight 1. Okay, sets calculation lines of flight 6, but you're going back to flight 3. Okay, it set lines of travel, right? Sets the ether, sets the umbrella, sets the conversion, sets the inferment of travel communications. So it gets complicated if you understand what your plane is doing through travel. So I'm just trying to show you the schematics, how powerful it is through all communications. So you got your plane going here, so I'm actually going through a portal and set travel, right? As it comes out, what signal line is it going through lines? Is it going through F1, 2, 3, or lines of 12? It sets lines position. Once it goes back to 0, it sets lines of timer, sets lines of screen adaptation to a system, processes the angle, point lines of graph, and that communication setting that puts all classes, calculation setting into I position inversion and travel. Okay, very, very, very complicated stuff to control the weather when you go through a portal through an airplane, right? So I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how this all works, so you get a better understanding how to invert the system, knowing exactly how to use your light, shades, and shadows, and position of the sun and position of the moon. The moon position this settings in infinity cycles of 0. So the moon lines of track centers here, says communications here, go in that position lines of direct signal location of grounds. Setting cross lines, the sun correlates the system lines of travel, cloud comes in, line rotation system, all through calculation setting. Okay, but the conversion is the travel direction. See, different direction, right? But you see it on a 4 panel, different direction, right? So as the plane's going through, it's crossing angles and 4 lines of flux through pi. All right, so it's very powerful. As a portal comes here and travel, indirect signals of grounds of service that moderates the system lines of detection that communicates the system through the I-line division that rotates the system all through travel. Okay, very powerful stuff. Remember, it's all in the I-line, guys. You don't leave the I-lines. You're all in process communications. So it's understanding how to communicate to your habitations and your inhabitation zones. Now you have 12 line signals and panel. After the lines of school, you guys are going to be in 24 line settings of constellation lines. 24. Okay, coming out of the 13 gates into 24 gates, constellations, right? The set position locations of team and units are going to be 2,400,000 gates, setting in sequence lines of panel. Solar traction, solar division, solar locations of solar generation lines of screens. Process the indication setting of its compass that crosses the communication system that overrides the system's lines of travels and direct signal location of its I-lines. Okay? Okay, so in that lines, change communicate inside tractions to its mapping sequence of pi. Very complicated stuff. But try to see it through, when a plane goes through, see it through a solar grid. See it through a holographic grid, see it through a holographic line, see it through imaginary line, through a visionary line, try to see it through a visionary graph, try to see it through a location graph, try to see it through a measure graph, a scale graph. So many communication graphs that you understand what a plane goes through in setting. The process, the indication system, is what is in travel, okay? All right, so let's get in ground centers and set positions because it's all a plane does. Here, in setting, right? And then it goes here, right? And then it levels out. That's all a plane does. Doesn't do anything else, right? But what you're not identifying, the plane is actually in stillness. It's not moving. Okay? It looks like it's moving, but it's not. Its emotional screen adaptation of its flux, it has to understand its data ports and process of its dimensional sail. Process in that position, location, and setting, it digitalizes the system of travel so that when you're looking outside, you see it in slow motion. But if you see it the other way, you see it going fast. That's the observation. Setting lines of travel, the plane goes in direct signals that grounds the surface in 4 angles of split lines of anomaly that process the angles in 4 communication settings. So the plane itself goes through 4 portals of travel in set traction, right? So it goes in this position, goes inside line condition setting, inside the portal itself, okay? And then it goes inside the portal itself in center operation, right? So the plane is not traveling, okay? It's just monitoring through portals. You guys didn't know that, did you? Because that makes a lot more sense when you're on the plane and you're just, you're looking in slow motion. So what you're identifying, every second, every minute, every hour, you're going through portal screens. Now that calculation lines of 12 lines of CERNs that process the particle accelerations of time. Sets the clocking system and settings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 direct signals locates the setting. So the plane is always in the center. It looks like it's flying, but it's not. It's always in the center, but it's inverting itself. So it's just changing different angles of space. But what moderates this system, this is the kicker. The space and the foundation of itself is pushing the airplane in mode control. So what you have to start identifying, everything around this system location setting puts every location setting to its conversion and travel communications. And that's what goes on with the plane. Okay? So what that does is basically the levels of its consciousness, okay, mode controls the plane. Okay, that's what we have to understand. That's a conscious being proceeding in that position to understand how to go through those portals. So you got 7 lines of communication, 7 CERNs, 7 direct signals. You got one processing, data processing signals, and location setting to travel. Okay, now as the plane is going through this position location, it's going through its track communication setting to its umbrella. But the plane never leaves, guys. It's always in the center. Everything around the system that's operating in setting, the actual film strip that's operating the system is pushing the plane in direction. So the plane is not actually moving. It's the conscious of everything around its system that's controlling the plane in mode control. See? You have to understand that because the thing is when the plane's in the air, right? You look outside the window, right? The window seat. You can see it in slow motion, right? It's in stillness. It looks like it's flying, but it's not. So it's pretty powerful stuff. You start to recognize. So all you're doing is you're just changing angles of set lines of communication, particle accelerations of time. So it modifies position of past, present, future of time. So it's going into center time, center mode, hyperdrive, acceleration, Mach. That's what the plane's doing. So it's going through portals and stargates every single time it takes off in set position, all through tractions. Okay? Mind blown? All right, so the conceptual setting puts all lines of position, lines of balance through a graphical screen where the actual airplane goes in set position. Travels point lines of graph, has a high-line signals location system to its earth line communications. Right? You guys are mind blown what's going on. And you wonder why you guys end up in cosmic interference and set travel, right? All right. So remember I told you everything is still, right? So that's what it is. It's space itself, moving itself. And that's where when you're on the plane and everything's in slow motion. Because if it wasn't in slow motion, you would definitely see the plane going the other way, which you'd be seeing going fast when you're on the plane. It's the inversion now, right? So in that conceptual setting, imagine seeing going slow and fast at the same time, right? On the ground, looking at the plane up, or on the plane, looking at the ground below, right? The process of communication setting comes in that setting, right? But it's got 3 ground, service, and travel, 3 set calculations. All right, and it's got its portal and communications, right? Setting lines of 1, setting lines of 2, setting lines of 3, setting lines of 4, and setting travel, right? All right, so the plane's here, okay? Okay, this is the plane, right there. There's the plane, right? Okay, it's here, okay, takes off, and now it's leveling out, right? So all it's in its center operation setting, but it's being propelled. It's being propelled by its own sun, by its own moon. That's been changing the weather patterns to travel in that communications. So it's direct line link, how it looks like it's communicates sending all through tractions. So it's amazing how it converts its own system all through travel. Okay. So it's a center point that never leaves the center point of its system. So it's kind of like you're always in the center. So you are the pivotal point. So the actual airplane, okay, is the pivotal of its body, right? That basically puts position location to it. It's Skynet. Skynet is its operation. Skynet is its headquarters. Now, what we have to understand how this all works is understand the communication setting when it comes into Pluto. Pluto has 3 signals of 3 grounds of surface and travel, all right? 3 ground set locations, center operation line setting, plane is in the system, inside tractions. Okay, so it looks like it's flying, but it's not. Okay, it's just moving at different angles of portals, inside traction. Okay, that's all it. So it's this, and it's going like this, all right? And it's going like this. See, that's all you're seeing in a plane, right? That's all it is. So it always stays in the center. So you spin it around. It's very powerful stuff in set sequence. Right? It looks like it's flying, but it's not. Because if it was actually flying, guys, like I said, if you're on the plane, you would see it going fast, but you don't. You see it going slow. So it's all digitalized in center operation that keeps the portal of communications and acceleration system and travel, directing ground centers as surface. Process indicates in setting all through tractions, all through different angles. Right? So the plane itself, okay, is in the center operation system. So what's actually moving the plane is the space and foundation of everything, which is his consciousness. It's the consciousness that's pushing the plane, right? The plane itself is just in the pie, just traveling through the pie. It's set travel. That's all it is, in all directions. Going to position all levels, Caribbean. Going to the Pacific, right? So that's all it is. It's all it's spreading out, line, screen adaptation, and sending all through trash. But it never leaves the center. Okay? If you can digitalize a platform, let's get a window graph line. I'll set a box frame simulator. Okay, box frame simulator, same course centers, lines of travel. 3 metric scales, 3 ground centers of service, set position 1 setting. Okay, and we have the ground centers. Okay, here's the plane. And Captain's gonna love this. Okay, there's the plane, right? That's the plane. It's setting the travel. Okay, that's the plane, right? So all the plane is doing is this. Traveling here, traveling here. That's all it's doing, right? So that's the different angle, see? Okay, it's just traveling. Okay, and then it goes to its destination through another portal in set position, right? And when it gets to that destination, everything that graphical screen that was made up disappears and goes back to 0. We can't have any graphical screen line adaptation left in set lines. It dissolved its system. It changed the clouds. It changed the measure. It changed the time. It changed the probably acceleration of setting. So if we get a true understanding of how this all works, then we understand the levels and scales of its division location system all through travel. Now this word comes into the oscillations, wind pass, pathogens, collagens, right? Directing lines of link, directing lines of panels, process in that position. So you can change the measure scales if you look into the sun and you can see the cloud in set position, right? Change the direction, right? So you have 4 panels of communications, right? North, east, west, and south, right? Start with that, right? Monitoring system, compass, and sending a travel, right? Directing ground centers of service, okay? Operation line settings and sequence, ground centers, line communication coordinates, communication lines of pi, core center line solar systems, line set location to Earth. All right, now we process the position of the plane. Plane's here, ready for takeoff. But this is the kicker. You're going to love this. The plane is already in the air. It's not on the ground. It's always in space. It's empty space, right? So the plane is actually in the center. What you're seeing is a copy and paste of its digitalized formation coming into the center. It's confusing to its anomaly, but you'll catch on. So that's the actual plane, right? So what this is doing is constantly doing this through a dial. It's a sundial, right? So as it goes around and around, you can actually see the clocking system. So if you get a true understanding, this is what a plane does. Okay, this is going to blow your mind. The clocking system, 3 centers, 1, 2, and 3. Set travels and set calculations. That's what a plane does. All through a clock. Stays in the center, but the indication of the arrows go around, right? So this is the plane going through time, right? And 24, 48, 72, 144 clocking. Okay, changing angles and set positions. But the plane itself stays in the center, doesn't move. Nothing moves. Okay? Nothing moves. It's conscious moving everything. So once you understand that, then you understand the operation of its system, which you guys understand more powerful in fractions, right? So the plane is just indicating settings, process lines of north, the setting lines of 4 sequence, process lines of south, setting lines of 4 lines of setting the sequence, processing the communication setting into position lines of travel. Okay? So that's all it is, right? When you look at your watch, okay, remember the 4 inhibitors lines, screen adaptation setting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, start with that, right? Okay, these are different time locks. Okay, they measure in scale. So they revert inside through the inner force in setting lines of travel. And then we have the outer force that platforms the inner line set location to stargates of travel. Sets course centers of time and measure in scale of travel communications. Directing lines of link, process lines inside line, 3 centers of travel, 4 lines of angles, and 4 communication setting to travel. Directing ground inside. So you have the inversion location to its portal sequence of seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. Sending power over reference time centers, process in that position, location, measure, and scale communication system. In that communication setting, grounds inside line, outside line traction, that comes into all communication system all through traction. Okay? The eye itself. See the eye? So it's really interesting. So, you know, when you look at the plane, right? The plane is digitalized inside the eye, right? So, you know, you're looking at the plane. Now you brought the plane in, right? So the plane's not there. It's already in space. It's already in empty space. So it's always in the center. All you're seeing is the different levels of time as the plane's going through and set tractions. But it's all done inside your eye. The spectacle screen adaptation setting has floaters of communication system all through travel, directing grounds of all polarities that process the portals of communication that the plane goes through and all through traction. Okay? All through setting, all through operation. Okay? Any questions on that? So check this out. You're bringing the plane in. You're bringing the plane in. Remember, I told you there's no plane. You bring in the plane. That's how powerful it is. So if it's all conception of the mind that produces every location to its energy, vibration, frequency, locations, whatever you're bringing in, flight manifest, or whatever timeline you're bringing in, or you're bringing in airlines, or you're bringing that position of spirit line, or in that position to its FAA, in that position, you're automatically bringing in that plane now. And that plane is already set in center of operation, which is the eye center set position to its spectrum, right? Which is extremely amazing, right? So nothing is brought in until you come into that provision. It's through your thoughts. I'm going to travel. Boom, plane comes in, right? So it's already set up in operation to its clocking setting of stream adaptation. Okay, travel, right? And so technically you got your Earth and setting in sequence, circulation and rotations, okay? So anything you bring in, okay, I want to fly to set position location Australia, okay? I'm going to take the flight, set position at 12 a.m. I'm going to be arriving there at 3 p.m. and sending travel. I got my FAA, I got my manifold, I got my manifest, I got my travel, I got my recourse, I got my console, I got my navigation system, I got my simulator to my simulation setting to travel, right? That's all set up, right? So now what you're in position of, in that tractions, you're setting your operation of your plane in center. Okay? So when it comes on that day, you will be on that plane in set sequence. Okay? It doesn't come in until you get in provision of your thoughts, action, emotion. So you're bringing in that plane. But it digitalizes from the ground. It's a set position, copy and paste. Okay? That's why you see the planes on the grounds. It's attractions. So it dissolves its system. So once you're in the air, this disappears, right? And just center lines operation. It sets the energy course, sets a time measure, and sets communication of scales into security. Comes into its 12 rainbows and travel communications. Now you travel through a timeline setting of a lock line screen to a plane. Different coloration lines of space of time. Okay, and set tractions. Okay? But nothing is formed, nothing is perceived, nothing is in consciousness, nothing is in position until you bring it in. That's what I'm saying. So you're automatically just in the mind itself, which is more powerful. But see, the one thing you guys identify is the fact that your mind is everywhere and creating, and the body is just more synchronizing its setting to the brain now conversion that is coming more of itself now into the mind itself. So what we have to understand is how to bring in the mind, how to bring in the brain, how to bring in the heart, how to bring in the soul and the body all at once. So once we come into that, no body conversion, just the mind itself through inception. And then it gets a lot more easier how we bring these things in, right? So if you say bad weather, you're bringing in bad weather and setting sequence. It's not now, but you'll see it when you go on the plane. And the plane doesn't know what's going on, so the plane is diverting the system because you caused bad weather already in sequence. Now it's in setting travel. Now it's caught in a loop. So it's going to go back in setting. It's going to land at a different airport and travel because you brought it in, right? You guys aren't identifying these things, are you? Because you're not processing how powerful it is and what you're bringing in through your thoughts. So it not come into the same day, might be in position, but the day it will come in is the day you go on the plane. You understand that? You understand that, team and units and everybody else. So perceiving yourself is knowing exactly what you're bringing through consciousness, is to keep yourself in observation at all times. Until you identify everything around you is its own consciousness of its own awareness. It's giving you instructions to keep you in mind of stillness, to come into your mind of empty space. And for you to perceive that, you understand what you're bringing in, right? The body itself, through the mind, right? So that's what happens in suppositions. But I've just shown you a higher level, lines, position locations, what you guys cause through all communication system, all through traction. Okay, all through the plane, right? All through weather. Oscillations, wind paths, high travels, indication system, all through calculation. Okay, very powerful what you guys did. So you have to be consciously aware of what you're doing as you're bringing things in, right? It's not there now, but it will be there when you go on the flight. Didn't know that, did you? On that day, you're bringing everything in structure. You're bringing everything in schematics. You're bringing everything into the simulation game of the simulator that you set up. You set up a simulator. Everybody know what a simulator is, right? A simulator itself is a mind alteration setting of a game that basically processes time, measure, and scale. Now, a simulator can only stay in a certain frequencies until it goes back in setting. And then it goes to another frequencies, and then you set up another simulator. But you're setting up different simulators because you're going too fast. And you can never land your system and travel until you understand how to modify that location setting to your CPU. Understanding that the coordinates puts all communication system off their tractions, right? So basically, if you set up the flights, and if you set up the manifest, and you set up the day, and you set up your hotel in that position, and you just let everything go, everything will be there for you. You'll get there safely and transition. Okay? Rather thinking, oh my gosh, why do I have bad weather? Well, you override your systems of what you already created through your simulator. Okay? You cause a lot of cosmic interference, cosmic or location setting to anything in the cosmos. Process in that position, location, travel. Right? So you set it up, and then you let it go. And when you get there, you're there. Right? But anything you say, you change the simulator. And you say, oh, I thought it's going to be sunny. No, it's going to rain now. It's going to rain now. So what'd you do? You changed the schematics of its travel. That changed the flight manifest. Now your plane is delayed. Understand? So if we get a true understanding of how this all works, I'm just trying to get you to process these things, knowing exactly what you're bringing in, okay, on that particular day. So that simulator is already set for you guys on that day. And wherever you're going to be staying, it affects your day, it affects your schematics, it affects everything. You're setting up a map of schematics on your adventure. Okay, so when you get there, it's all set up. Let it go and just let it flow, right? You don't have to synchronize anything. You don't have to change anything because it's already set up. But what changes that is that you want to have expectations on this. You want expectations on that. See, that's what you guys focus too much on. You need the TV on to understand the TV. You need your phone on to understand the phone, okay? You need a cup of coffee in that position. Not realize I don't need coffee in coffee. You know, I don't need the liquid. I don't need the coffee itself because I see the bottom what it is. I see the instructions. The coffee itself is its own self. It's a self modification of its settings. The watch itself doesn't need to have anything digital analog in that position. So that's what you guys have to get out of. It's everything expectation. Processing that is getting you guys out of stories of everything. Rewriting your systems of no story, no beginning, no end. This gets you higher levels of all communication system all through tractions. So the more you let go and the more you get in position your settings, how to data process these locations, you understand how to come into that settings. So the next time you take a flight, you know exactly what to do through schematics and travel. Okay? See you in 5.